International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, members of the national community living abroad are continuing voting to choose a president in good logistical and organizational conditions to ensure the smooth running of the operation. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, is attending in Beijing the 9th meeting of the Africa-China Forum aimed at reinforcing partnership and cooperation. Algeria has called for the holding of an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to examine the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Salmani. Voters from the national community living abroad began voting to choose a president on Monday in good logistical and organizational conditions to ensure the smooth running of the operation. Asya Bikar has the details.
From the start of the operation at 8 a.m., the polling stations recorded a significant influx of Algerian voters established in several countries, particularly in Europe and other parts of the world, who had come to exercise their electoral duty from the 2nd to the 7th of this month. The Algerian diplomatic and consular authorities have provided the members of the diaspora with all the human and material resources to ensure the success of the elections in which 3 candidates are running. The candidates are candidate of the Front of Socialist Forces, FFS, Mr. Aushish Youssef, independent candidate, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, and the candidate of the Movement of Society for Peace, MSP, Hassani Sharif Abdelali. In Italy, the polling stations were crowded from the very first hours of voting with a remarkable participation of various segments of the community, in particular young people and students studying at Italian universities. According to the Algerian Consul General in Milan, Adel Talbi, the operation was going in good conditions at the 12 polling stations across Italy.
The voting operation for the national community in northern Italy started on the 2nd of September. It is taking place in good conditions. The Independent National Authority for the Elections, ANI, has provided all the necessary human and material means to ensure the success of the election. The number of voters registered at the Algerian consulate in Milan is 3,790 partitioned in 5 polling stations, including 3 mobile ones. This was aimed at making the ballot stations available and near all the Algerian community to exercise their right in the best possible conditions. We call on all the national community in northern Italy to head to the polls and exercise their right in voting and participating in the country's political life.
In the south of France, the coordinator of the Algerian Independent Authority for Elections in the region, Jamal Badra, stressed the interest granted by the national community to the election, pointed out that the electoral campaign, which was launched on the 15th of August, took place in good conditions. A total of 62 polling stations were opened for the members of the national community living in the various towns in the region. The Consul General of Algeria in Marseille, Imad Salatnia, said that the opening of other polling stations, particularly in Marseille's neighborhoods, had greatly facilitated the voting process and lightened the burden of travel for the members of the national community living in the south of France. Voting for the presidential election on September 7th also was underway in good conditions at the Alicante and Valencia polling stations in Spain. In Germany, where 15,151 voters residing in this country are voting in polling stations in Berlin, Frankfurt, Bonn, Munich and Hanover. For the first time, the German authorities have agreed to open polling stations outside the headquarters of Algerian diplomatic representation in order to make it easier for voters to carry out their duty and to avoid having to travel long distances. For its part, the Algerian Consulate General in London has assured that all conditions had been met for the vote taking place at the offices of the Consular Centre in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, Cardiff and Belfast. In Russia, voting began began at polling station number 1, which opened at the Algerian embassy in Moscow, while a second polling station will be opened from next Thursday in St. Petersburg until the 7th of September. Outside Europe, the members of the national community living in Tunisia, Lebanon, and Cyprus have begun voting at the various polling stations. According to figures provided by ANI, the members of the national community abroad, estimated at 865,490 voters, 45% of whom were women, compared to 55% who were men, and 15% were under the age of 40.
Still with the presidential elections, on the 19th day of the election campaign, the candidates running for the September 7th presidential election focused on the need to boost local development in order to respond to the concerns and aspirations of the citizens. The details with Mariam Barshi.
The candidate of the Socialist Forces Front FFS, Mr. Youssef Aouchiche, who organized a community event in Oran in the morning before speaking at the presidential forum of the Algerian radio, said that his program proposed notably the creation of local economic centers taking into account the specific features and potential of each region. Mr. Aouchiche explained that the aim was to encourage initiatives at local level and through free investments from bureaucratic obstacles, stressing that his program advocates for the fight against development disparities in the economic sector, particularly in the processing industry, whether in petrochemicals or agri-food. He also called for the development of the tourism and agriculture sectors to achieve food self-sufficiency, notably in cereals. The campaign director for the independent candidate Abdelmejid Tebboune, Brahim Merad, called on voters in the province of Sougahras and Guelma to vote for Abdelmejid Tebboune in order to support the country's development. In Sougahras, Mr. Abdelmejid Tebboune's campaign director said that his program included a number of priorities relating to the development of border and landlocked regions with the aim of improving the living conditions of the inhabitants. He added that a high turnout in the elections and re-elections of Mr. Abdelmejid Tebboune would make it possible to complete the process of achievements begun during his first term in office, notably with regard to young feature prominently in his electoral program. In Guelma, Mr. Merad said that during his first term as president, Mr. Abdelmejid Tebboune had succeeded in laying the foundations for a solid development base to tackle the development shortfalls that existed in certain regions of the country. The candidate of the Movement of the Society for Peace, MSP, Abdelhadi Hassani Shrif, for his part said in Batna that his project aims to create jobs and promote investment in various fields according to the needs of each region. He also stressed the important role played by young people in completing the edification process through the implementation of special programs to protect and raise awareness among young people of their responsibility in building and defending the homeland. Mr. Hassani Shrif added that his program aims to be a unifying national project capable of preserving the homeland and its sovereignty, social cohesion, values and freedoms, a project which proposes appropriate solutions to the concerns of citizens with a view to achieving comprehensive development.
The candidate of the Socialist Forces Front Party FFS, Mr. Youssef Aouchiche, has pledged to take a series of important measures to revive the economic sector given the potential and assets of each region of the country. Asya Bikar has the more.
During his interview as part of the forum of the presidential elections at the Algerian radio, Mr. Aouchiche has said that his electoral program aims to develop the economic sector, particularly the manufacturing industry, as well as the tourism and agricultural sectors, to achieve self-sufficiency in many sectors, notably cereals. Regarding social policy, Mr. Aouchiche reaffirmed his commitment to improving the living conditions of citizens and developing the social system, starting with increasing the wages, granting income for vulnerable categories, revaluing family allowances, and establishing a social protection system that meets the aspiration of Algerians. He also promised to protect the purchasing power of citizens and to rehabilitate the middle classes. The FFS candidate promised to undertake political and institutional reforms and to enshrine the separation of powers by adopting the principle of popular participation, control and transparency in the management of public affairs. Regarding the country's foreign policy, Mr. Aushish pledged to keep supporting just causes around the world, notably the Palestinian and Sahrawi causes.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. This is the English service. Now, the Minister of the Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, today attended in Beijing the 9th meeting of the Africa-China Forum. Mariam Barshi reports.
The meeting, presided over by China and Senegal, is aimed at assessing the progress in implementation of the agenda set as part of the Africa-China Partnership. It includes cooperation and exchange programs agreed on by the two sides in the social, economic, scientific and cultural fields. In this respect, today's meeting focused on the examining of the recommendations to be submitted to the Africa-China Summit meeting due to open in 2 days' time in Beijing. Among these, the draft final declaration and the executive program set for the 2025 to 2027 period. It is worth noting that outside the meeting, the diplomacy chief Ahmed Attaf has had a series of discussions with his counterparts from notably Tunisia, Mauritania, Libya and Kenya. His meetings also held with the foreign ministers of Uganda, the Congolese Republic, Nigeria, Benin, Tanzania, Djibouti, Somalia and the Central African Republic as part of consultations and coordination on various issues of common concern.
Instructed by the President of the Republic, the Minister of the Knowledge Economy, Startups and Micro-Enterprises, Mr. Yassin Al-Mahdi Oualid, is taking part in the Indonesia-Africa Forum in Bali. More with Asya Bakar.
This forum, whose opening was chaired by the Indonesian president, constitutes a strategic platform dedicated to strengthening partnership and cooperation between the African countries and Indonesia, with the aim of deepening economic, political and cultural relations between the two parties. In his speech, Mr. Walid expressed Algeria's full support for the objectives of the forum, which aims to create new beneficial partnerships in the best interest of the peoples of Africa and Indonesia. Therefore, the minister highlighted Algeria's efforts to strengthen economic integration in Africa through strategic projects aimed at improving interconnection between the countries of the continent. These projects include the Trans-Saharan Road linking North Africa to the south via Algeria, as well as the fiber optic network extending across the Great Sahara to speed up the digital transformation on the continent. He also highlighted the importance of the Algerian-Nigerian gas pipeline project, which aims to strengthen cooperation in the field of energy among African countries. The minister also noted that Africa must move from an economy largely dependent on natural resources to an economy based on knowledge and innovation. Thus, he called for the adoption of policies supporting skills and encouraging innovation in different sectors, especially since Algeria, through the African Startup Conference, intends to set up a complementary African vision capable of supporting young innovators and encouraging them to develop their projects within the African continent.
With regard to the just causes defended by Algeria, the Minister of Knowledge Economy seized the opportunity to reiterate the right of the Sahrawis to self-determination, calling for ending the genocide committed against the Palestinian people in Gaza.
As we celebrate our shared progress, we must also acknowledge the struggles that remain. There is still one people seeking their freedom in Africa, the people of the Western Sahara. Their plight reminds us that the quest for independence and self-determination is not yet complete. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the suffering of the Palestinian people who seek freedom and an end to one of the most horrific genocides in modern history ongoing in Gaza.
That was the statement of the Minister of the Knowledge Economy, Startups and Micro-Enterprises, Mr. Yassin Al-Mahdi Oualid, during the Indonesia-Africa Forum. As you followed in our top stories, Algeria has called for the holding of an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to examine the latest developments in the occupied Palestinian territories in the light of the Israeli army's continued attacks on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The meeting, planned for later this week by Slovenia, which currently chairs the Security Council, came as Israel had intensified its attacks on the Palestinian territories. The UN Security Council's members will discuss ways of securing an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and paving the way for the implementation of the two-state solution as the only means of reaching a fair and lasting peace in the Middle East. In this connection, the UN coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Tor Wensland, described the situation in Gaza as disastrous and affirmed that the scale of destruction was immense in the Palestinian enclave, which has been devastated by the Israeli attacks launched nearly 11 months ago. He stated that the humanitarian needs were huge, while pointing out that the civilian population continues to pay the cost of such a conflict. In the meantime, the Israeli army pursued its acts of aggression against the Palestinian population in Gaza, killing and wounding several people. According to the news agency Wafa, at least 33 Palestinians have been killed and 67 others wounded in the Israeli bombardments which hit the southern towns of Khan Yunis and Rafah, as well as the refugee camp of Bureij in the central part of the territory. In this respect, UNRWA said that up to 15,000 displaced were living in horrible conditions in the central part of the Gaza Strip, notably in Deir al-Balah, subjected to Israeli bombardments for the past few days. Now, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, at least 129 people have been killed and 59 others injured while trying to escape from the central Makala prison in the capital Kinshasa. In a statement posted on X early today, Tuesday, the Interior Minister of DRC said prisoners attempted the breakout yesterday, Monday, amid a fire that hit the building's administrative buildings, including the infirmary. He added that there was significant material damage. DRC's Minister of Justice called the attack a premeditated act of sabotage carried out to undermine efforts to improve the condition of prisoners. He added that investigations are underway to identify and severely punish those who instigated these acts of sabotage. He also announced a ban on the transfer of inmates from the prison and said authorities would build a new prison, among other efforts to reduce overcrowding. Makala prison is the largest in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and was built to hold 1,500 prisoners. It currently has between 14,000 and 15,000 detainees, according to official figures. Most of them are people awaiting trial. This is Radio Algeria International. You're listening to the English service. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to this news edition of your weekly program, The Health Magazine. As summer approaches, the temperatures have already started to go up and many people are exposed to the risk of heat stroke, whether on the streets walking or laying on the beach enjoying a prolonged sunbath. Heat stroke is a form of hyperthermia or heat-related illness, an abnormally elevated body temperature with accompanying physical symptoms including changes in the nervous system function. Unlike heat cramps and heat exhaustions, two other forms of hyperthermia that are less severe, heat stroke is a true medical emergency that is often fatal if not properly and promptly treated. Heat stroke is also sometimes referred to as heat stroke or sunstroke. Severe hyperthermia is defined as a body temperature of 40 degrees Celsius or higher. The body normally generates heat as a result of metabolism and is usually able to dissipate the heat by radiation of heat through the skin or by evaporation of sweat. However, in extreme heat, high humidity, or vigorous physical extension under the sun, the body may not be able to sufficiently dissipate the heat and the body temperature rises, sometimes up to 41.1 degrees Celsius or higher. Another cause of heat stroke is dehydration. A dehydrated person may not be able to sweat fast enough to dissipate heat, which causes the body temperature to rise. Heat stroke is not the same as a stroke. Stroke is a general term used to describe decreased oxygen flow to an area of the brain. The most susceptible individuals to heat stroke include infants, the elderly, often with associated heart diseases, lung diseases, kidney diseases, or who are taking medications that make them vulnerable to dehydration and heat strokes. Athletes, individuals who work outside and physically exert themselves under the sun, infants, children, or pets left in cars. Heat stroke or insolation is sometimes classified as exertional heat stroke, EHS, which is due to overexertion in hot weather, or non-exertional heat stroke, and EHS, which occurs in climatic extremes and affects the elderly, infants, and chronically ill. Now, what are heat stroke symptoms and signs? Symptoms of heat stroke can sometimes mimic those of heart attack or other conditions. Sometimes a person experiences symptoms of heat exhaustion before progressing to heat strokes. Signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion include nausea, vomiting, fatigue, weakness, headache, muscle cramps and aches, and dizziness. However, some individuals can develop symptoms of heat stroke suddenly and rapidly without warning. Different people may have different symptoms and signs of heat stroke. Common symptoms and signs of heat strokes include high body temperature, the absence of sweating with hot red or flushed dry skin, rapid pulse, difficulty breathing, strange behavior, hallucinations, confusion, agitation, disorientation, seizure, and or coma. Can infants, children, and teens suffer from heat stroke? While the elderly are at greatest risk for heat stroke, infants and children are also at risk. In particular, infants or young children who are unattended in locked cars may suffer heat-related illness quickly, since the indoor temperature of a locked car can rise to dangerous levels even in moderate weather. Rarely, infants have died of heat stroke when overly bundled in their cribs. It is critically important that parents understand the medical dangers inherent in leaving children unattended in cars in addition to the obvious safety risks. Further, cars should always be kept locked when not in use so that children may not enter them and become trapped. Among older children and teens, heat stroke or heat-related illness is a risk for athletes who train in hot environmental conditions. Among reported heart-related illnesses in U.S. high school athletes, the majority of cases occur in football players during the month of August. First and treatment for heat stroke. Victims of heat stroke must receive immediate treatment to avoid permanent organ damage. First and foremost, call the victim. Get the victim to a shady area, remove clothing, apply cool or tepid water to the skin. For example, you may spray the person with cool water from a garden hose, fan the victim to promote sweating and evaporation, and place ice packs under the armpits and groin. If the person is able to drink liquids, have them drink cool water or other cool beverages that do not contain alcohol or caffeine. Monitor body temperature with the thermometer and continue cooling efforts until the body temperature drops to 38.3 to 38.8 degrees Celsius. Always notify emergency services immediately. If their arrival is delayed, they can give you further instructions for treatment of the victim. Finally, how can heat stroke be prevented? The most important measures to prevent heat strokes are to avoid becoming dehydrated and to avoid vigorous physical activities in hot and humid weather. If you have to perform physical activities in hot weather, drink plenty of fluids, such as water and sports drinks, but avoid alcohol and caffeine, including soft drinks and tea, which may lead to dehydration. your body will need replenishment of electrolytes such as sodium as well as fluids if you sweat excessively or perform vigorous activity in the sunlight for prolonged periods. Take frequent breaks to hydrate yourself, wear hats and light-colored, lightweight, loose clothes, keep cars locked when not in use, and never, ever leave infants, children or pets unattended in a locked car. Those were some measures to be taken in order to prevent heat strokes, especially in summertime and in Algeria in particular, which is considered a country with relatively hot weather. And with this we come to the end of this edition of the Health Magazine. Do join us next week for another edition of our program with another subject that deals with your health and well-being.
استمعوا إلينا لنقل